feels a little bit like fall is in the air, and another indicator of the changing of the seasons would be our songbirds thinking about heading south for the winter. I'm Lee Rayburn, and that's where we start today with our guest, Bill Volkert. Bill is a retired wildlife educator, naturalist. He worked at the Horicon Marsh State Wildlife Area for 27 years and knows birds better than just about anybody. So if you have a question about the birds you've been seeing, some of their behavior, or calls, if you'd like to try to mimic one, join us at 1-800-642-1234. That's 800-642-1234. If you'd like help on identifying a bird and you've snapped a picture, you can send it to us along with your questions. Email talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. And Bill, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Lee. Great to be back.
And I love seeing the world through your eyes, because your eyes are always looking up towards the skies. You're always listening to the birds. And this is the time of year where we're starting to hear it quiet down a little bit.
Yes, it is. This is the time where things are really starting to change. And different birds, of course, migrate at different times. So when we talk about migration, it already begins in February when Canada geese and red-winged blackbirds begin to move. It winds down as we get to the latter part of May, when the nighthawks and the cuckoos are the last to arrive. And it starts up again as we get into the latter part of July. The first shorebirds will show up from the Arctic. Mm-hmm. And now in August, we're starting to see the first real movement. Interestingly, the last birds to arrive are the first to leave. So
really?
They have the shortest amount of time. Well, it's because what drives the migration is food. And so Canada geese, they just simply are feeding in the uplands and are really discouraged or have lack access to food with snow cover. So
sure,
it's a short time of the year when we really have a lot of snow. But if you're an insectivore like the songbirds, it's a much shorter season before it warms up, the insects hatch, and then before we get the frost again. So migration really takes up, when we look at the whole family of birds, most of the year. I like to focus on the songbirds, where really we have the first arrivals in that latter part of April. May is the real peak. June is nesting. Mm-hmm. July is the fledging season. The young are coming out of the nest. Now August, this is the flocking season. So the birds are no longer tied to that nest site and that very local movement to care for the young. Now they begin to move. The young are full grown, and this is when they start to move to areas of good feeding and abundant food sources. So the flocks will start to form. And this is also where the first birds start to not only locally shuffle and move, but we also see the beginning of the migration. Last night, we apparently had a pretty good movement of birds with a north wind. So we see the first actual exodus of some of the early songbirds. And about 3 days ago, I saw the first nighthawk already starting to move around a little bit, and a few of them are going to be heading out. And over the next 2 weeks, we'll see the big nighthawk movement.
I told you that I had a squirrel yelling at me the other day, wondered what was going on, and saw a hawk land on the wire in my neighborhood. Hadn't seen one all season. Could that be part of the migration?
No, that's probably the Cooper's hawk.
Okay.
Or red-tailed hawk are the two most common in the area, and those are always going to be a threat for, especially for the smaller rodents. A nighthawk, actually, it's not a hawk. It's in the what's called the nightjar family, or the old name was goatsuckers. And there was an old myth that they milk the goats at night.
What?
I don't know
I'm
where
glad we
these names came
updated
from.
the names on that.
But it's related to the whippoorwill.
Oh, okay.
Which is actually a very large family of birds around the world. And I think the more desirable name is the nightjars. And because they feed in the evening, and they have this very large bucket-like mouth, a very tiny bill, but when they open the mouth, it's just a huge gape. And that's for the large insects and moths that they're scooping out of the air.
Before I get to Julie's call here, I also thought I saw a mottled robin on my fence the other day. Like it looked like a baby robin, and I thought it's a little late in the year to be having baby robins, but if they're here year-round, it's probably fine, right?
Well, robins will have a few that stick around in the wintertime, and it's mostly a trade-off. Do they try to just tough it out, or do they use that energy reserve to migrate and depart, which the vast majority do? Robins can have more than one brood, and so this is probably a second nesting, or at least nesting attempt if they lost the first nest.
Sure, but this is a baby. I think it's not really ready to head south for the winter anytime soon.
Yeah, and there's sometimes, again, that trade-off. Can you pull off one more family, and are you going to be lucky that they will mature and be able to move And I think for some of these birds, it's better if they're able to try a second time, give it a shot. They may or may not survive. In a sense, it's the same strategy that owls use. Owls will lay commonly 3-4 eggs, but they don't expect all the young to survive because they never know what that rodent population will be by the time the young hatch out and demand food. And so there's always an insurance policy. If you all of a sudden you realize later in the year that it's a big rodent explosion in the population, too late to start again.
Right.
So,
it's better to have more.
Exactly.
I mean, it's cruel to us, but as a survival technique, it makes natural sense.
That's just what I was going to say. Yeah, it seems kind of cruel to us to raise some of them and just let them die, or even worse, sometimes the siblings will eat their brothers or sisters. Now there's a dysfunctional family. But there again, it's that insurance policy that at least somebody will survive, and it'll be the strongest and healthiest out of the population.
And this migration's a quiet migration, unlike the spring where the birds are coming up and they are singing, they're full-throated and letting it rip.
Yep.
This time they seem to be rather subdued.
And unless you're really looking for the birds, this is a somewhat unseen migration, or as I refer to it, the silent procession of birds. So in springtime, when the songbirds in particular arrive, you notice the first oriole that it's in your backyard or in the neighborhood.
Hear it before you see it, probably.
Yeah, bright colored. The leaves are barely emerging, so they're very visible, and they're singing, and they're in that breeding plumage. In fall time, we actually right now have more birds than we have in spring because we've added all those young for the year, and yet we see them less frequently.
And it's quieter.
Yeah, it's quieter. They're not singing because they're not defending territories or looking for mates. They're not producing the full song. It's just the call notes to keep the flock together, communicate, and when they're, of course, in flight, to stay together. And a lot of the birds are already molting into that winter plumage, so they're losing the bright colors. And the other problem is the leaves are still full on the trees.
Sure.
So these little 4 or 5 inch birds up in the treetops, they're really hard to see. And you've really got to get out there with your binoculars and intentionally look for them to see what's going on. The other thing that we have is it's really easy if you're keeping track of the phenology of birds. In other words, the dates that they arrive. The first day you see something that comes in. It's really hard to know the last day when they've departed because that's always in retrospect. You'd have to keep daily records and then look back and realize, it's been 2 weeks since I've actually seen one of those. Is that just simply because they're hidden in the leaves and you didn't notice it, or did they actually depart? So it's always a little guesswork roughly about the time that we see the last ones that have moved out.
You make me appreciate fall that much more, Bill. There's more birds now than there are at any time of the year here, and as they get ready to migrate south, they're beginning to flock in what you call the silent procession, and I like that very much. It feels a little bit like fall. Let's go to your questions now for our guest, Bill Volkert, our aviary expert, 1-800-642-1234, or email talk@wpr.org, and we'll start with Julie in Monona. Hi, Julie.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I've put up 2 hummingbird feeders on either side of a fairly large deck. And in my backyard, I've got wildflower gardens. Now, we've got at least 4 different hummingbirds visiting the feeders, and my question is, some of the hummingbirds are little and they don't seem to get chased away by the larger one. A larger one will watch them, and if 2 of the larger ones show up at the same time, they dive bomb each other. Am I looking at family groups or 2 different species?
Well, we mostly have one species of hummingbird in Wisconsin. That's the ruby throat. We will, on occasion, especially this time of year, we'll get a few reports or records every so often of western hummingbirds. The rufous hummingbird is one of the more common ones from out west that may travel into Wisconsin on its way south. Anna's hummingbird has been sighted on occasion every few years, but I would say 99.9+% of our hummingbirds are going to be the ruby throat. Now, you said the larger ones, there's not much difference in size, but the male has that brilliant, bright red throat, the ruby throat, or when he turns away from the light, looks black. Makes them look a little bit larger in size. And the young ones right now are all full grown. They look pretty much like the females. And yeah, those are the young or females that are coming to feed. They will sometimes share the feeder, but the males are very defensive over a food source. And so if another male in particular tries to come in, yeah, they'll drive them out. Or sometimes any other hummingbird, I'll get them fighting over my feeder. And I'll see them just do laps around the house where one of them is just chasing somebody else off because that is his food source. Whether he's actually drinking from it right then or not, he's defending it. So, yeah, those little hummingbirds can get quite aggressive.
I don't think of hummingbirds as possessive until you see them fighting over hummingbird feeder.
Yeah, and especially if you get out into the wild where you have a big flowering group of plants that are desirable for them. Those birds will just guard them fiercely. And it's really quite interesting how fast they are, zipping around, chasing each other out, and then displaying for the defense of that food source of theirs.
So as opposed to family or types of hummingbirds, it's more likely this is a gender dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It's more likely yet that those are young ones that are locally hatched out. But as I said, this is that flocking season. There's a mixture out there. So the birds are moving around.
Oh.
So
where are hummingbirds this time of year in terms of heading south for the winter?
Well, there again, you'd have to mark individuals to know who's who, and you'd have to be able to see that. And that's the problem for hummingbirds. There's no way to easily mark them that we can capture, without capturing them to identify them. Songbirds, we use color link bands.
Sure.
So that without having to catch the birds, you can then look from a distance and identify individuals. You just can't do that on those short legs of hummingbirds. So there's always a little guesswork of who's who. More likely, this is a locally hatched family, but there is that time of year now where they're free flying and there could be a shuffle. So it's hard to say if that isn't a bird that maybe came from somewhere else. And as things are, we're getting into the cooler nights and we're sort of anticipating the eventual food shortages, maybe some of the northern hummingbirds are moving in. Again, who's who out there?
Yeah.
We don't know if they all look alike. So there's a little bit of uncertainty.
Julie, I think you're lucky. I only had one hummingbird that I saw all summer, but just seeing one that's enough, and I very much appreciate the call. We'll go to Janet in Iron Ridge next. Janet, hi.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. My question is on my favorite birds are the phoebes and the peewees and the flycatchers, and all summer long enjoy listening to them. And the month of August, I have more bugs in my yard than I do in June. And I would say all my flycatchers, like the great crested flycatcher and the phoebe, they're all gone. And I was wondering, you said there was August is a month for flocking, but was just wondering how, as they're flocking for the fall, if they're still feeding on so many flies and mosquitoes, that I have more in August than I do in June.
You'll also notice, I'll get off the subject a little bit and come back to it, but you'll notice that as we get into September, the swallows will start to really concentrate heavily, and then they're going to be heading out, and we're going to have some really nice Indian summer days yet.
Sure.
And may even have a mosquito hatch yet. Wonder, so why did those birds leave so early? They can't wait till the last day that we get that first killing frost, and all of a sudden overnight the fruit is gone.
It's too late.
So they have to anticipate that.
Yeah.
And so what you have is perhaps already, we had, as I said earlier, a movement of birds last night. Some of them could have departed as early migrants, or they may have just moved around locally. They're no longer tied right to that territory where they nested for the summer, your backyard or neighborhood. And so there's a little bit of that shuffle. And I've had this experience in the past where somebody will talk about all their birds seem to be gone. And then next thing you know, the next person is saying, I've never seen so many. So there's a little bit of that local movement of birds as well. And as I said earlier, of course, with the leaves out there and the birds not calling as frequently, they may be silently overhead. I heard a couple calls of orioles, which were so loud around my neighborhood over the summer. They're still there, but they're not calling as frequently, and I don't know how many are there because they're up in the treetops where they're not that visible.
So it might not be that the phoebes and flycatchers have all gone. It might be that they've moved on to another local area. I think the tough part is there's still too many bugs.
And nobody to eat them.
Janet, thank you for the call. Let's go to Marlene and Ladysmith next. Marlene, hi.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I have two questions. The first one is hummingbirds. They're starting to sell more and more hummingbird houses, but I'm not seeing any hummingbirds moving into them, and I was told that they don't really go into houses, they make their own. And the second question is, we have a small park with a little pond, and we have a problem with geese all over the place. You can't hardly have your kids down there. Is there a decent way to get rid of them?
Oh, good questions. The hummingbird house is just a gimmick. They build a little nest. They're not going to use it. And it's also, I've seen some very fancy, very ornamental hummingbird feeders. That's, again, to sell it to people. Hummingbird doesn't care. So just simple sugar water. Don't get the colored stuff. Don't get all the prepared stuff. That's really
Just sugar
unnecessary.
water.
Just sugar water.
I thought the red attracted the hummingbirds.
Well, red does, but oftentimes the feeders will have that anyhow on it.
So as long as the feeder's red,
And the food coloring really doesn't add anything to the bird or for its diet. So
Sure.
They're probably trying to sell more to people than they are to try to benefit the hummingbirds. So, it gets to be a little gimmicky. And hummingbird house now, they build a tiny nest. They're not going to use it. And, you can put that out in your backyard and it'll look nice, but it's not going to attract anything.
As for the geese.
Yeah, Canada geese, especially in urban, suburban areas, that's always been a challenge as these populations have built up. The thing to keep in mind, like all birds, they are federally protected. So with that, without special permits, there's nothing that you can do to harass or discourage or remove those birds. On a community level, cities and townships have been able to apply for permit to either they can oil the eggs so they're not hatching any more young. They have done roundups of them. To relocate them, or even in the past they used to process them as food. That became somewhat unpopular among people. I don't know how much that program is still ongoing.
Is the permitting through the DNR bill?
It's Fish and Wildlife Service.
Fish and Wildlife
because they're
Service.
federally protected.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Yes.
All right.
So you would have to do that. The problem with, say, oiling eggs so they're not successfully nesting in the year, you are already trying to do something when the population is a nuisance. So you're just keeping it from getting bigger. Relocating the birds, well, they're your problem, and now you're giving it to somebody else. The most effective thing for Canada goose population management is regulated hunting. The problem, of course, is you cannot legally discharge firearms within city limits, and so that's not an option. And I've written extensively about it. This is really a big problem. And what it comes down to is it's not a wildlife management problem. If you have too much wildlife, there's a lot of simple ways to manage them. It's a social political problem. I don't mean to be cruel about this, but I can give you a dozen different ways to kill a Canada goose. That's easy. To do it in a socially acceptable manner, however, especially in an urban suburban landscape where it's very visible, are people going to buy into it?
How can we humanely deal with this population? And from the perspective of the geese, we're the problem here, not them.
Right.
We're the one encroaching on their nests, on their babies, on their families. And what can Marlene do?
Well, you have to work with your local community and the Fish and Wildlife Service and go through the DNR. They would be the first ones to approach, but it would be a federal permit that they could issue to you. But they also will put sideboards on just what are the options.
I thought Canadian geese weren't necessarily interested in settling down near us, and so if we have a presence there or if we have a dog that goes out in the yard, the geese aren't likely
they're pretty tolerable.
Really?
And, the other problem is you said we're encroaching on their territory. It's even a little more than that. We've created good habitat for them. and the way we've done this is really through the urban, suburban sprawl that we've seen, that kind of landscape. Canada geese, They like water, which is places to escape to from predators for safety, and they're an upland grazer. Grass or any other wild vegetation is going to be a major food source for them.
Plenty of grass in the suburbs, Bill.
So, yeah, that's what you have. You have your golf courses, your parks, and even these retention ponds with grass around it and lawn grasses and so forth. That's ideal goose habitat, and we have made a de facto refuge because we cannot hunt them, and they are fairly tolerable of people, so we really can't easily discourage them from these areas. And in more aggressive manners, that, of course, requires a federal permit. So that becomes a management challenge of how do we do it in a manner that is going to be acceptable and, of course, now permitted. But yeah, go contact the local DNR, work with your community, see if there is some sort of permit that you can get for that. There are means to do this, but you've got to go through some hoops.
And those means might have some political and social ramifications.
Well, and the problem is when you do it, say in a larger community, you'll have a public hearing.
Yeah.
And we've been at those in the past, and that's the problem right there. That's what I mean by being not a wildlife problem, but a social political problem. And so you end up with almost two factions. Some people just kill them all. I don't care. Get rid of every goose. And other people, no, they're not a
Save
problem.
every
I
goose.
save them. And let's come to agreement. So that becomes the difficult challenge then.
Marlene, I'm sorry. This is a bigger problem than just Canadian geese. I apologize. I got a picture here in the studio. Bill, Denny in Middleton emailed it to us. What kind of stress caused this is his question. He named this bird Anakin after Darth Vader. When he takes his helmet off, he says it's kind of a pathetic appearance. It looks like it's kind of a blurry picture, but
Yes.
the bird looks like it's bald on top.
Yep.
Doesn't have any feathers on it around its head.
And this is very typical. Cardinals seem to be the most susceptible. It's feather loss.
Is it
And
disease?
particularly, well, there may be multiple causes for this. Could be some stress and kind of compromised health for the bird. Feather mites is another possible cause for it. And basically, it's more as an aesthetic problem. And yeah, some of them can look pretty ugly when they lose all their feathers around their head. This guy does not look.
That's when you realize that they're ancestors of the dinosaurs, because you take those feathers off and it looked like a Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah, it's a pretty pitiful looking bird. The biggest problem there is the feathers are insulating. Cardinals don't migrate. So if you have extensive feather loss through the winter time, that can be a problem for the birds. Otherwise, it's really more, as I say, it just looks bad.
You said they were molting and getting their winter coats on, or winter feathers on?
Well, this is not molting.
Right, but would the could they regrow
They
their
could
feathers?
regrow, yeah. And what you have is a regular molt going between the heavy down feathers for winter and that what we think of as winter plumage, the non-breeding colors. And then you also can have kind of an emergency feather growth. If a bird loses a feather, it's damaged throughout the year. They can always regrow them because they need them. So it depends on whatever the cause was here, how extensive that is for the bird to be able to regrow those feathers again.
But it's not male pattern baldness in a bird. This
No.
is something. This is like mites or...
Yeah, it could be feather mites or other kinds of stress or underlying problems. We're
Denny
just seeing
says
the
it's-
symptoms.
Yeah, Denny. Okay, it's the symptom, not the disease. Denny says he's been seeing this bird around his house all year, so it sounds like it's been pretty chronic.
Pretty persistent problem, yeah.
Bill Volkert is our guest. We're talking about birds this hour and want to invite you to our conversation. You can send us a picture like Denny did of his Darth Vader cardinal by emailing us talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. If you have any question about birds you're seeing around Wisconsin or would like to try your hand at a bird call, you're welcome to join us at 1-800-642-1234. That's 800-642-1234. Bill's a retired wildlife educator and naturalist, worked at the Horicon Marsh State Wildlife Area for 27 years, and we do have a question from Sumner here about the Horicon Marsh that we will get to when we continue. I'm Lee Rayburn, and you're listening to WPR News. Songbirds are starting to flock, and fall migration is almost at hand, and it is an indicator of the changing of the seasons. We are talking about the beautiful birds of Wisconsin this hour with our guest, Bill Volkert, retired wildlife educator and naturalist, worked at the Horicon-Mars State Wildlife Area for 27 years, and he's answering your questions, your calls, your emails, and let's get right back to it now with Lee in Green Bay. Lee, hi.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment and a question. My house sits on about 20 acres here. I've got partially wooded, partially field. Sunday night, I had such a nice flock of the bird that you say is a nighthawk, correct? There must have been 20, 25 of them towards dusk. Really nice thing to see. And I'd like to ask how are whippoorwills doing in the state? I don't hear them anymore like I used to. You know, that's kind of a thing of the past. And one more thing I'd like to say to the listeners, don't let your cats run loose. Bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And information came out from the Canadian Wildlife Service that their assessment for the birds of Canada, that the number one human-caused mortality factor is feral and free-ranging cats. And it's one of the simple things we can do. Just, don't let cats outside because it is a non-native exotic predator that birds just have no ability to deal with, and it has a serious impact.
Well, from a conversation we had a few weeks ago, one is keeping your domestic cats inside. Two is dealing with the feral cat population, and that is something that largely goes unaddressed, and it's those feral cats that I would imagine wandering Canada that could be a problem. And if we found a way to deal with them in a population control, it's kind of like Canadian geese. It becomes a social, political issue as much as a wildlife issue.
Right. And, of course, because cats are considered pets, even if they're free-ranging feral cats, there's that humane treatment. And then there's a problem. You do take them in. They're not accustomed to people.
Yeah,
How
they
do
don't
you
want
adopt
anything
them?
to do with you.
You have basically a wild animal. And
Indeed.
you can't just confine and keep a big holding pen of hundreds and hundreds of cats. So how do we manage that? It's a problem we created, and quite honestly, it's a problem that we're going to have to solve, especially since birds are in trouble from a lot of other different impacts, and this is just one of many different.
Now, I'm not advocating murdering cats.
Right.
There is trap, neuter, return programs that can limit the population, and you can begin to control it that way.
Well, the problem with that is you still have the cat outside
for the rest of its life.
Yeah.
But it's the mating. You can't kill the problem. If that were the case, we would have killed it by now because we're killing 3 to 5 million of these animals every year already. How many more do you want to decimate? There's got to be a solution to this problem that makes sense for everybody.
Well, then the biggest problem is that oftentimes people come at this like they do in a lot of things on a more emotional level than a rational level. And cats certainly, people do warm up to them. And so then it becomes really hard to come up with an agreeable solution when people feel so attached and very emotional.
But feral cats never warm up to humans. They are, like you said, they are wild animals.
Yes.
So they should be treated as such.
But
they're invasive wild animals.
Exactly. Yeah, it is an invasive exotic species. And as I said, it's becoming a real dangerous world for birds. We've seen tremendous declines. We've lost
natural habitat.
Yeah, well, a lot of factors out there. And this is just one other one, and probably one of the easier ones to address. The other question was on whippoorwills and how are they doing, and he doesn't hear them anymore. And yes, that's a bird that is in serious decline. We still have them in Wisconsin, but they've sort of retreated to the central and west central part of the state. I would hear them in other areas, 1 or 2 birds. And this was in the past when the population was healthy enough that what was considered prime habitat was basically saturated, and these were birds spilling over and trying to find more a mate and a place in somewhat marginal, remote areas outside of that core area of the population. Well, as the population declines, they essentially retreat to that core. And the caller here from the Green Bay area, those were, again, birds that in the past, when there were plenty of them, were moving out to there. And, it's getting silent. You can still find them in a few places. There are some good spots in Wisconsin, but it's a much more restricted distribution than it was in the past because it's a smaller population.
When we have discussions with our entomologists on the air, we always get the stories about the windshield effect, that we're
Right.
not seeing the insects that we used to see, that these birds have a diet largely of insects, and we're seeing less insects. We're seeing less natural habitat. We're seeing more predators. We're seeing a real squeeze on the bird population from a number of different places. But is the diet and the amount of insects part of that?
I'm sure it's a serious contributing factor. And so here's one of the problems in bird conservation is, first what we do is we monitor their populations to see how many there are and how well they're doing. What is the trend over time? Is it maintaining itself? Are they increasing and recovering? Or are they declining? If we start to detect declines, now it becomes complicated. What is the cause? And as we've already alluded to this, there are oftentimes multiple factors. Which are the ones that have a large impact that we can easily resolve? And quite honestly, when we look back at the declines of eagles and ospreys, that was a little bit of an exception because that was a straight cause and effect. It was DDT resulting in eggshell thinning, resulting in inability to rear young and populations declining.
And when it was that easy, it was pretty...
Ban one chemical, there it is, they're back. Now we have multiple factors. So it's the window collision, the roaming cats, we have tropical rainforest loss, we have habitat loss here, pesticides and chemicals, environment, insect declines. What is the biggest impact for which group of birds, and how do we address it? It's a very multivariate, very much multiple factors that are affecting them.
I hear this all the time, Bill. No silver bullet.
Yeah,
It's buckshot.
There's no simple solution, but we have to do something if we're going to keep the birds here. And as I always remind people, and I usually like to close with this line, is that, well, we are the source of all the environmental problems.
There is one problem. It is us.
Yeah, but there's also a little bit of an optimism. We are also the only solution. We're the ones who are going to have to solve that. And as we're dedicated enough, I'm sure we can. We've got to do it before it gets too late, before these birds do disappear.
Lee, thank you so much for the call. And Bill, I appreciate that perspective. We'll go to Jolie and Mosinee next. Jolie, hi.
Good morning. A question I would like to ask is the smoke fire, or the fire smoke, how did that affect the bird migration and the bird's health?
That's a good question. The smoke, of course, we can see that can drift for a long distance, and as birds are migrating, they may encounter that. For the most part, I would think that like a storm system, birds should be able to fly around that. But there was an unusual instance, I believe it was just last summer. There were swallows that literally fell from the sky. They got into a heavy smoke, and they were just choking to death, literally. And they were dropping out of the sky, apparently could not fly around it. It was pervasive and thick enough that it was actually impacting them. My other concern is, besides the short-term event of smoke in the atmosphere, is the loss of millions of acres of habitat. Yes, it will regrow again, but considering that birds are under so many pressures, especially with the habitat loss and constrictions of it, we have taken a lot of acres out for, say, the next several years before that starts to regrow. And also what we've done is we've converted that from a mature forest stand into what will now be brush and shrubs. So one group of birds are going to benefit. They're going to get that early growth of succession in the next few years as those forests recover. But we've also now taken away for those forest interior birds the large swaths of habitat. And that, again, adds to the whole conservation concern here.
It feels like forest fires have become an annual event to some degree, or the smoke from forest fires in Wisconsin at some point is going to hit us during the summer months. And if it hits us, it's hitting our birds. And
yeah, it's making a more unhealthy environment for everyone, doesn't it? Yep.
Jolie, thank you for the call. Kaya in Madison, you're next. Hi, Kaya.
Hi. I was up around Barron, Wisconsin, visiting some friends. They live in on the edge of a little lake. We were on the deck, and they had a hummingbird feeder out. And a hummingbird feeder flew up to it, and I thought, oh, that's a beautiful. Oh, wait a minute. That's not a hummingbird. It was a hummingbird. It came back again and again, but it was not colored like a ruby-throated hummingbird. It was black, with an orange neck. And I said, Tom, my husband, did you see that? And he said, yes. And the homeowners, they don't pay attention to the color of the bird. They did, but I couldn't believe. I came home, I looked up in all the books, and no, not any hummingbird colored like that. Is there an explanation for a hummingbird that is that could be? I'm just I'm astounded.
Okay, I'll take a guess at this. You mentioned orange. You said it was restricted to the throat, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the more common western hummingbirds that we'll see in Wisconsin is the rufous hummingbird, and it gets its name because it is sort of a reddish-brown color. If you saw it just in the throat, I'm wondering if that isn't a young male that is just starting to get that adult plumage, and so it's not just that's not complete plumage, but oftentimes for hummingbirds also some of that has iridescence to it, and the lighting that you get, the angles, we may not see all of the color. So as I say, a little bit of a stab here, but I think you probably have a young male rufous, and that's always a worthwhile sighting in Wisconsin.
And a rare one.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a little bit increasing sightings of that bird, and the question is it first of all that we're having more birds showing up, or do we have people who are reporting them more? So there's a little bit of that observer bias could be part of it. We don't know in the past how many were coming from the report. We just know the number of reports.
I got to say, I like the idea that we're paying more attention to the birds and we're looking closer at them and we're identifying them. And we've got these tools now that help us identify them. We've got apps for that.
And I think that's really been a big aid.
Yeah.
I used to get a lot of phone calls from people that at least knew to contact DNR for wildlife questions. But it's only those individuals who are curious enough and going to take the time to do it. And, when I look back, I always found it interesting that some of the rarest bird reports in Wisconsin always were in the backyards of some of the best bird watchers in Wisconsin. They reported the first of this and that.
How do these bird watchers attract all these rare birds?
The golden crowned sparrow from out west, it shows right up in a bird watcher's backyard. The first report of the house finch back in the 70s showed up in Milwaukee at one of our prime bird watchers. Well, that's because they knew, and everything else went unreported.
Yeah.
And I think here we've increased the awareness by providing these tools and a network for people. Take a picture now, and you can share it. You can use an app. And with that, I think we're getting a better reporting from people.
Kaya, keep your eyes open, and thanks for calling. Follow up with the hummingbirds, specifically the ruby-throated, are most common here, as you mentioned. Bill in Oregon emailed us. He says, based on many years of observing and tracking the ruby-throated hummingbirds at his flowers and feeders, Bill's last male sighting is usually around September 1st, plus or minus 1 week. Bill's last female sighting is usually in the first week of October, but has been as late as October 17th. Many years, he says, the last female ruby sighting overlaps with his first dark-eyed junco of the season.
Oh, very observant. Very good. That's great. Yes, as we get into September, this is when these birds are going to start moving out. And there has been this myth of take the feeders down because you'll hold the hummingbirds here, and then they're not going to be ready to migrate. And that story's been around for years. The fact is that the signal to migrate is the shortening day length. They're going to leave no matter what. And in fact, those birds that stick around really late, they may need that food as an energy source. So keep it up until you know that the hummingbirds have departed. So throughout most of September, keep those feeders there. The birds will take advantage of it until the vast majority of them have headed out.
Until they don't need it anymore.
Right.
Bill Volkert, our guest, retired wildlife educator and naturalist, talking birds this hour, and you can join us at 1-800-642-1234. That's 800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. If you've got a picture that we can help identify, you can email it to us, and we'll take a look here in the studio. Let's go to Carolyn in Madison next. Carolyn, hi.
Hi, I think you answered my question. I used to watch purple martins and flocking this time of year, and chimney swifts, and there used to be some kind of swallow that nested under the Har River bridges. There's still some of the mud nests that they made, but there aren't any more of them. They were here ever since I've lived here in 1960. Anyway, is there a chimney somewhere in Madison where the swifts are swarming yet?
Good question. You can search online. There's a little event they call Swift Night Out, and people gather at some of these communal roost sites where the swifts come pouring into. Madison, Milwaukee, some of the bigger cities have got these old factory chimneys, and these are some really good sites where they concentrate. I just had heard about one, and escapes me where it was, and they said over 1,000 chimney swifts are coming there in the evening. This is the time of year, so take a look online. Just search Swift Night Out, and you'll see where there's a local event, and you can join people right around sunset and watch as birds come funneling in. It's really quite an event. But you mentioned about the decline of these birds. Now, swifts are not related to swallows, and but yet they depend on the insects that they're gathering out of the air. And we've got a number of working groups in conservation lumping them all together, what we call the aerial insectivores, the birds that are catching the insects out of the air, and that includes the whippoorwill and the nighthawk. And as we mentioned earlier, the number of insects out there has certainly declined, so that food source is no longer as available. Maybe some of the habitat for nesting, the old barns are coming down and being replaced with steel sheds. The barn swallows are probably losing some nest sites there. And we also don't know, in terms of the pesticides and contaminants in the environment, that the insects that they're picking up, if that's somehow affecting the birds as well. And these are long-distance migrants. So we also may have some restrictions here on chemicals, not necessarily the neonicotinoids that we know are serious problems these days, but other countries to the south are still using other more harsh chemicals. They don't have the same kinds of restrictions, and this is where the birds spend the winter. Is that an impact? We don't know, again, what's all adding up, but we can certainly see the result of it. The aerial insectivores have seen, as a whole host of birds, pretty serious declines.
So I've got the website here as wiswifts.org, as in Wisconsin Swifts, and I see an event coming up here Friday in Milwaukee near Pulaski Park, Saturday in Whitewater. Janesville has one on Sunday, and there's actually a Swift Week in Madison coming up September 6th through September 11th. And Carolyn, you sounded so sad. I wanted to let you know that the Madison Swift event where you are will be Saturday, September 5th. They still don't know exactly where yet because it will be determined by where the chimney swifts will be found.
Excellent.
So I hope that makes you feel a little bit better.
I hope people turn out for that one. That should be fun.
And thank you so much for the call. So there is an entire Swift Week here in Madison, and there are some swifts to be found, even if they can't be found in the same numbers that they used to be, which is, that could make you sad. So thank you for calling, Carolyn. I've got a question here about the place that you spent almost 30 years. Sumner emailed us and wants to know if anyone who's writing up a history of the Horicon Marsh and the diverse bird wildlife that can be found there. Do we have the definitive history, or is that going to be left for you to write, Bill?
Well, actually, it's interesting that as a wetland, and certainly the largest in the upper Midwest, there's very little that's been written about it. The Milwaukee Public Museum put out a publication. It was an old magazine called Lore back in the 70s. They had a focus on Horicon Marsh's history, probably about 30 pages and some photos. There was the book called Wild Goose Marsh, Robert Gard and Edgar Miller, and focusing on the time of the 70s when the Canada geese were really abundant, with a little history and framing that with some of the aspects of Horicon Marsh. And my good friend Don Miskey, who passed away a few years ago, he grew up on the marsh and interviewed a lot of the local farmers and hunters, and he did a series of newspaper articles from that, and he combined that as a book, and I was proud to be able to write the foreword for it. And that's about all there is. I was fortunate enough to work with wildlife biologists, researchers, get to know a lot of the people who grew up on the marsh and lived there, and I collected a lot of information, and my knowledge grew because of them. And I wouldn't say that I enjoy writing. It's not a labor of love. It's just labor. But I feel an obligation, and I am going to be writing that. Oh. And I have it in the works right now. I'm not going to guarantee when it's coming out. People have asked me, how long is it going to take? Well, when it's done, it'll be finished. But I am going to be writing a complete or comprehensive cultural natural history of the Horicon Marsh. And I hope to tell that whole story from all the things that I learned from so many other people.
That's amazing. Sumner, I'm so glad you asked. So the book is on the way.
Yeah, slowly.
Yes, it takes what it takes, and it is a solitary experience, and you're just sitting there alone with your word processor and a blank page or an empty screen,
and I'm only going to write it once, so I want to make sure that it's complete and I'm satisfied with it. I don't want to later on think, I should have added this or that and try to do another edition.
I got news for you, Bill. Yeah. You're going to think that no matter what.
I suppose.
There's always that feeling that there could have been something more, or maybe should have left something out. Yeah. That's the nature of, making it happen. But I really am excited about this idea that you're writing the book, and it's based on everything that you've learned in almost your 30. There's nobody better to write this book than Bill Volkert.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Looking
very
forward
generous
to
of you.
it.
I appreciate it.
Bill, we've been talking a lot about what's threatened the bird populations around Wisconsin. One of the things that we haven't mentioned that I've seen in news stories recently, and it's what Daniel emailed us, he's wondering about the avian flu and what's its impact on bird populations and whether or not birds might be better dealing with this plague or becoming immune to an avian flu.
That's a good question. Now, the biggest source of that is, of course, the bird confinement operations, the big chicken, turkey, and certainly in Asia, waterfowl. This is where these epidemics start to spread. And, of course, from there, they escape and get out into the wild bird population. It seems that certain species are perhaps a little more susceptible than others, and whether that's the physiology of the bird or a flocking behavior where it can spread among the population more readily. There's certainly been outbreaks, and it doesn't seem to be very indiscriminate. It's shown up in a number of different birds here and there. It has not been a major epidemic in a large, broad geographic region, but it's just adds another worry for the health of our bird populations, and even for bird banders. And I'm a licensed bird bander. Handling birds, they're also saying there. You want to be a little careful because, these diseases can spread from there to humans, and we've actually got them in the hand. So with that, we are monitoring it. And the one thing to keep in mind, and this is something I learned from working with the biologists in DNR, is just because we see a sick or dead animal, that's certainly a concern, but we really can't conclude what that was until we do the necropsy, sort of the animal autopsy on it, to find out, is it an isolated case or is it something that is more of an epidemic proportion? And these are the things that we do, say, on our wildlife areas, especially the wetlands where we're concentrating ducks and geese. So we're giving them great habitat, but there's also that chance that we're setting the stage for an epidemic outbreak and where something can backfire, where we lure so many birds into an attractive area. And then all of a sudden,
anything contagious is going to catch fire.
Exactly. Late summer, one of the big ones is botulism this time of year, which is naturally occurring in the shallow water. It's an anaerobic bacteria. That's always a concern. So we monitor those wetlands regularly right now, looking for any sign of dead waterfowl or other birds, and of course examining that. Then there's also a few other kinds of major epidemic diseases, Newcastle disease and a few others that are out there, avian cholera, things like that. So wildlife health is a whole nother branch. But yeah, we monitor that as well and just try to see how birds are doing, both in the wild of things that periodically come up or things that may be new and emerging, and bird flu certainly is one of those newer ones.
So keeping your bird feeders clean, keeping your bird baths, refreshed on a regular basis. Those are small things I can do. Keeping your cat indoors, small things I can do.
One other one is also if you have any windows that birds are colliding into, do something with that and make sure that it's more visible to the bird. I always remind people, sure, maybe only 5 birds a year that fly into your picture window. Start adding that up with everybody in your neighborhood who has picture windows, and all of a sudden we realize we've got 100 birds dying out there, and something that we could easily prevent. So American Bird Conservancy website has some really good materials that we can put on windows to reduce that.
There's something we can all do on behalf of our beautiful birds of Wisconsin. Bill Volkert, can't thank you enough and look forward to having you back as always.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lee.
Bill Volkert's retired wildlife educator and naturalist, worked at Horicon Marsh State Wildlife Area for almost 30 years, and now we know he's writing a book about it, and that's something to look forward to as well. I'm Lee Rayburn, and you're listening to WPR News. Where does that mercury come from? Where's it going, and what does it mean for you and me here in Wisconsin? I'm Lee Rayburn, and our next guest has been researching mercury in our environment, where we will find it, and what its outcomes might be. If you have questions about the story of mercury in Wisconsin, you can join us at 1-800-642-1234, 800-642-1234. Perhaps you've even suffered the symptoms of mercury poisoning, and some have. You can join us as well by emailing talk@wpr.org. Our guest is Marie Perkins, Associate Professor of Wildlife in the College of Natural Resources at UW-Stevens Point. Marie, welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here.
I just want to start with, I guess I'll start with what I think I know about mercury, but then when I start thinking about it, I realize I don't think I know very much. Like, I think of where mercury comes from, and we can start there with coming from coal-fired power plants. That's kind of where I've heard it comes from. Is that accurate? And if so, are there other places we find it?
Yeah, coal burning power plants are one of the main sources of mercury pollution into the environment. Here in Wisconsin and other places around the country, we do have some historic contamination that would have come from pulp and paper mills. And we know that historic deposition into the environment can really last long periods of time. So mercury is really persistent in the environment. So we could still see some, exposure from that historic contamination. We also, there are some natural sources of mercury in the environment. Things like volcanoes can emit mercury. And then another one of the main sources is associated with artisanal gold mining. So this is like small scale gold mining, which is usually illegal. And one of the main things about mercury is that we refer to it as a global pollutant because it can, once it's released into the atmosphere, it can travel really long distances, remain in the atmosphere for 6 months to a year, and be deposited far from the source. So mercury that gets deposited in Wisconsin could be coming from quite far away.
So it would seem like if this is a global pollutant, it would require a global solution. But do we even have such a thing as global solutions?
Yeah, it is definitely tricky, right? There is currently the Minamata Convention on Mercury, which is an international treaty that aims at reducing mercury in the environment. So I think the current number of countries that are signed on is about 154. And then all of the countries that are part of this convention put together plans on how they're going to reduce mercury emissions into the environment.
Marie, was Minamata, Japan, one of the locations of a real bad mercury poisoning incident? Was that right?
Yes, that's correct. And that's is what the convention is named after. So it is one of the kind of main historic ways that we know about the effects of mercury on people. And I actually went to Minamata, Japan. So I've been there and kind of got a tour around the historic contamination. And basically it was a company that was polluting methyl mercury directly into the bay, the Minamata Bay, and then people would fish in that bay and were eating the fish and then being exposed to very high concentrations of methyl mercury and having these really high poisoning events or really negative effects from the mercury.
Well, go on about these negative effects, Marie.
Yeah, so mercury is a neurotoxicant, so it negatively affects brain and nervous system development. And this is why one of the reasons why a lot of the like exposure regulations focus on children and women of childbearing age, because they're most vulnerable. Developing brains are most vulnerable to the negative effects, and they can have a large array of effects on human brain development. But mercury is bad for everybody, and so it can can also affect adults as well, and can have really large scale effects on pretty much every system of the body.
And your research is not necessarily on human impacts, although you've been to Minamata and you've seen the story firsthand. But you're looking at things like other animals, and I think of fish first and foremost, because I think of mercury getting it from the coal plants into the air and then the water and then the fish, that not unlike Minamata, but in lower concentrations. And we've got the DNR warnings about inland waterways with mercury contamination. But what sort of animals do you look into when it comes to mercury intoxication, poisoning, or whatever?
Yeah, my background really focuses on birds.
Mm.
So you mentioned that, when we think about mercury for human exposure, we think about these fish consumption advisories and people being exposed through eating fish. And that's kind of the main way that people are exposed to mercury. But we have a lot of fish eating wildlife as well. And so wildlife also get exposed to mercury when they're eating fish. So there's been more research looking on wildlife that eat fish and kind of the negative effects and exposures. But my research specifically takes a little bit of a different focus, and I focus more on birds that forage on invertebrates, so insects and mollusks and things. And one of the things that's pretty interesting about this is, one, we have insects that have aquatic life stages, so they can be exposed to mercury within the aquatic system and then emerge into the terrestrial environment. And we do see mercury increases, it biomagnifies through food webs. But we do see that insects also have food webs. And so some certain species of insects can have pretty high mercury concentrations, just kind of related to those food web interactions.
Had not thought about that, Marie, that if our birds are if our insects are aquatic and we've got mercury in the water, then most likely we've got mercury in our insects. And if we've got birds that are eating invertebrates that are eating from the water, then we are most likely getting mercury in our birds as well. And is that what your research has been finding?
Yes, yeah,
Oh.
we do find this. So um, my research mostly focuses on kind of two ways to look at mercury in birds, and one is to um, use birds as bioindicators of mercury within the environment. So, looking at where across the many different regions, but we could think about across the state of Wisconsin where we're finding more mercury exposure. And then we also have a concern about the birds. So, like humans, birds that are exposed to mercury have negative effects on their health.
Nervous system specifically, or beyond that even?
So they're pretty broad. One of the main areas that's been kind of most studied is looking at reproduction. And
Oh.
so we do see a lot of negative effects on reproduction, and they can kind of come in a whole different variety of ways. So one species that has been looked at pretty heavily are loons, who are fish-eating birds.
No.
I know, and we do see, behavioral changes, and maybe they just don't incubate their eggs well, or they don't care for their
Mm.
chicks as well as they should. But across lots of species, we see just, lower hatching survival or lower fledgling survival. So the eggs or the young just are not surviving.
Marie, we've just been talking about the reduction in bird population and all these different ways in which the bird population is threatened. We did not mention heavy metal poisoning among them, but clearly that seems to be a part of this story.
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely think that there can be population level effects to these contaminants within the environment and mercury specifically. So, of course, as I mentioned, if you're having a lower rate of reproduction,
Yep.
that could absolutely affect the population. One of the things that I, think about when I'm thinking about how the effects of mercury may impact bird populations is it's just this additional stressor that adds to all of the different stressors that these birds are facing. So, reduced reproduction, as I mentioned, but some effects have just shown that, like song can be affected. So maybe they're just not as good at finding a mate, or there can be some effects on flight. So just all sorts of different ways that they can kind of add to just the difficulty of birds surviving.
Oh, mercury is in our insects, our water, our fish, our birds, and most likely, if we're part of the food chain as well, somewhere in us as too. Marie Perkins, our guest, associate professor of wildlife in the College of Natural Resources at UW Stevens Point. And you're welcome to join our conversation about mercury in Wisconsin at 1-800-642-1234. That's 800-642-1234, or email talk@wpr.org. And we'll go to Jeff in Mercer next. Hi, Jeff.
Good morning. First of all, great subject, great topic. The reason I'm calling is I spent about 20 years of my life as a field tech for two different scientists here in Wisconsin. One was Dr. Mike Meyer out of Rhinelander with DNR. The other was Kevin Chino out of USGS in forget the anyway, those two scientists, and we studied mercury loads in loons, ospreys, as well as eagles. And yes, we did find the studies were published, and they found that it did have both neurological as well as physical effects, as your speaker addressed to. And I just wondered if she's heard of the studies and followed their work, and any feedback she could give me on that. We did find that methylmercury, traces of it can be followed all the way from Indiana and Illinois, so it is airborne, and it is a real wildlife problem.
Jeff, thank you so much for your call and your decades of research. And Marie, are you familiar with some of the work that's led into the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I am. I've read those papers. They're probably not in the forefront of my mind, as those are not species that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I am familiar. There, you all here in Wisconsin, we're quite lucky to have had the researchers that your guest mentioned working on mercury here in the state.
Dr. Mike Meyer and Kevin Keogh, if I'm not mistaken. Are those names? Yeah, I think that's what you said, Jeff. And thank you again for sharing your work with us. But some of the species that you have looked at, Marie, in Wisconsin are the red-shouldered hawk and the wood duck. And I would like to know what you found.
Yeah, so we looked at red-shouldered hawk, which are a really interesting raptor species because they do tend to nest in kind of wet forest areas. And so we had some concern that they might be exposed to higher mercury concentrations. They're foraging more on aquatic species, so they like to eat things like frogs, and maybe snakes that are associated with these kind of wet forest systems. The research, and we looked here mostly in central Wisconsin, a little bit in northeast Wisconsin, and overall the concentrations that we were finding were relatively low. The juveniles particularly had really low mercury concentration, so we were quite happy about that. We didn't have a high sample number for the adults, so I think more research is probably needed there. But But overall, the data that we did find indicated that they weren't being exposed to levels that were likely to be, high risk for them. So that was good news for our red-shouldered hawks here in Wisconsin. We had some similar results for our wood ducks. So wood ducks forage on a kind of variety of food, but often foraging on vegetation, which is generally low mercury, and vegetation foraging wildlife are usually at low risk. But they do start to eat invertebrates during the breeding season, and feed them to their young tend to eat a lot of invertebrates. So we were certainly interested in what their mercury concentrations might be. There have been some other studies in other locations that have shown wood ducks with higher mercury concentrations. But again, here in central Wisconsin, the concentrations that we found were relatively low, and in the range that we were not likely to be concerned about negative effects.
Those results surprise you, especially considering you mentioned one of the reasons we have some mercury in our environment in Wisconsin is because of the pulp and paper mills that would be in central Wisconsin. So did these results, it sounds like good news by and large from what you looked at, the red-shouldered hawk and the wood duck. This surprise you at all, Marie?
Yeah, we were a little surprised. We always feel bad when we find results that are good for our animals, but less exciting for us. But we were quite happy that to find those results. But I did expect to find some. I did think there was a possibility that we could find higher levels, especially as some other studies elsewhere had shown higher concentrations. And like you said, we know there is mercury contamination in our systems here in Wisconsin.
And we're still using coal-fired power plants to this day in some places. So in Wisconsin, it's still part of our energy infrastructure. But not as much as we used to. So do you, Marie, have any perspective on historically where your results most recently stand with mercury poisoning or mercury contamination in our wildlife, in our waterways, compared to recent or past history?
Yeah, here in Wisconsin, I don't have specific knowledge. I did a little bit of sleuthing before coming on just to get a feel for the broader state of Wisconsin, and it does look like overall we've been seeing some declines as we've had more regulations on coal burning power plants, and like I said, as those historic further away from those historic pollution. Um, but I have done some long-term uh, historic studies in the Northeast, looking at a variety of different songbirds, using museum specimens, so specimens collected up to 150 years ago. And we did find for all of those songbird species, we looked at increasing mercury over time with some variability depending on the species and kind of the data set that we had. We had kind of expected to see a decline in more recent concentrations because there have been a lot of regulations put in place across the nation. But overall, we were still seeing mercury increasing in those species.
So you went to these natural history collections, you went back and tested some of these birds for mercury contamination, and you found that that level has gone up over time, and you did not see a reduction, at least from the museum collections?
Correct. We had a combination of museum collected individuals, and then birds collected in the wild more recently.
Okay.
And we were able to kind of look at the trend over time, and overall we're seeing increases in exposures.
So we started this conversation, Marie, talking about how this was a global pollutant, that it gets airborne and there are no barriers or boundaries to it. But when we ask about local solutions or what we can do in Wisconsin, what would you say?
Oh, that is a really tough one. I mean, One of the issues, of course, as I mentioned before, is that mercury is persistent. So once it's in the environment, it can last a long time. It can also be re-emitted back into the atmosphere and moved around. Certainly, having more regulations on coal burning power plants and reducing our use of coal is certainly a way that can help. We do find that even though we have this, once it's up in the atmosphere, it can move. We do see that mercury concentrations can be higher, closer to coal burning power plants in general. One of the other ways that mercury can get kind of removed from the system is it can get buried into sediments. But if we go in and disturb those sediments, then they can get redistributed within our aquatic systems. So some like caution associated with activities that can disturb sediments within water bodies can, also be a good idea.
I've seen this in the past when I lived out in New York. There were questions about dredging. There was a story of Onondaga Lake and that you can't actually upset the dredging. You can't do it, and you can't upset the bottom of the lake because if you do, you'd be unleashing all these heavy metals from our old industrial era.
Yep, exactly.
When you mentioned the pulp and paper mills, where was the mercury contaminants coming from there? What was the process that led to mercury in our environment as a result?
So I'm not as familiar with kind of the system behind how historic pulp and paper mills worked, but it seems like it's related to at least in some part to bleaching process. But that's a bit outside my area of expertise.
That's not anything that we're doing today, as you understand it, is it?
As I understand it, mercury's been removed from that system, and we have removed mercury from many of our industrial processes, but certainly not all of them.
Marie, where does your research take you next? What are you looking for in the future with your work on this contaminant?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure.
What questions do you still have about mercury?
I think it's really interesting, even though mercury is a contaminant that we've known about for many, many decades. It's just has such a kind of unique makeup and unique way that it cycles through the environment and how it cycles through like an individual body or a bird, that there's lots of questions out there. One of the kind of local, for me here in Stevens Point area of interest, I'd like to look at what's happening with our kind of tree swallow population. Tree swallows tend to be a good species to study mercury in because they like to forage on aquatic invertebrates that have emerged. Not eating them from the water, but once they emerge into the terrestrial environment, they eat a lot of insects, and then they nest in nest boxes, which make them easier to capture and sample. So that is a species I have a lot of interest in, especially here in Stevens Point, where we've got, both the Wisconsin River and the Little Plover River nearby, and kind of seeing how, what types of exposures we're seeing, and then if we can link those to any negative health effects.
It would be interesting to find out. We just talked last hour about swallows that fell from the sky en masse as a result of some of the forest fire smoke that we've seen. So there's all these canaries in our coal mine, Marie, that seem to be able to tell us, or at least become, as you refer to them, bioindicators of the pollutants in our environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to thank you for your research and sharing it with us and explaining it in a way that I can understand it, because when I started to think about it, I really realized that I knew very little about mercury in our environment, and yet I'd seen an awful lot. I've seen stories of people with mercury poisoning, but you can, and really quick here, you can overcome mercury poisoning, or you can recover from it if it's not too toxic. Is that correct?
Yeah, humans are not terrible at excreting mercury. So birds are not great at it, but humans do excrete mercury, so they can excrete it through their hair and other ways. And there are some medical interventions that we have that can help to remove mercury from the body. So generally, the amount of mercury contamination, just, not talking about these.
Right. Minamata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not talking about those types. Generally, they're not going to be so high that it's going to be like deadly.
Marie, I want to
yeah.
thank you. We are out of time. Marie Perkins from the UW Stevens Point. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. Those are the words of Maya Angelou. I'm Lee Rayburn, and our next guest is an expert in the monarch butterfly. She's the past director of the UW-Madison Arboretum, professor emerita in the UW-Madison Department of Entomology, and a longtime monarch butterfly researcher. Her studies have taken her from Minnesota to Wisconsin, from Texas to California, and all the way south to Mexico. Karen Oberhauser also started the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, a citizen science project with volunteers throughout our continent. And if you have questions about our monarch butterfly, then you are welcome to join us, or a story or an observation. 1-800-642-1234. That's 800-642-1234. Or send an email to talk@wpr.org. And Karen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lee. It's great to be here, and it's always fun to hear people's stories and questions.
I know, and I want to start with this because I knew the show was coming up, and I'm walking home from work yesterday, and I see a monarch butterfly in the garden, and we've got some great gardens around our neighborhood and folks who work a lot on them. And then I wondered, is that actually a monarch butterfly? Do we have fake monarchs in our midst?
Well, first of all, congratulations to you and your neighbors for having plants for monarchs in the neighborhood. That's really great. It, in all likelihood, was a monarch. There is another butterfly that looks a lot like a monarch, the viceroy, but monarchs are much more common than viceroys, and you're more likely to see a monarch at this time of the year.
So I did see a monarch yesterday, and I don't know what made me think, like, is that a real monarch? But there is something back in my recollection that there were fake monarchs among us. And I don't know that you would be able to necessarily identify the two just with a quick glance. But if you see one that looks like a monarch in our area, then chances are it's a monarch.
It probably is. And the viceroy looks a little different than the monarch. So if you're used to looking at butterflies, you can spot the difference pretty quickly. But sounds like maybe you'd need a little practice on that one, Lee.
I'm not good at identifying butterflies, evidently. So I want to, there's a story that quoted you from a few years ago. And so the question I'm going to ask you is, how are our monarch butterflies doing? Back in 2023, WPR News talked to you, and you said, I'm worried that it feels that it's fast in this lifetime. If the decline of monarch butterflies continue, they'll be gone. A story from last year in September of last year, citing you again, says that we had a really great year for monarch butterflies last year. So, how are our monarch butterflies doing, Karen?
Well, monarchs are kind of holding their own right now.
Okay.
So we have up years and down years, which are due to variations in weather up here in their northern breeding range, and also weather during the rest of their migratory journey. But they are not really declining right now. They're not in a long-term trend. There's not a decline or an increase. They're kind of staying steady, but at a lower number than they were a couple decades ago.
So you've been studying monarchs since, I think, like the 1980s. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of time into this. And I was looking at the National Wildlife Federation story on monarch butterflies yesterday, and their numbers say that the population's declined by about 90% since the 1990s. And one of the reasons they cite is over 90% of the grassland ecosystems along the eastern monarch central migratory flyway have been lost, converted to agriculture or urban development. There seems to be a 90 to 90 link there between loss of habitat and loss of population, at least up until recently.
Yeah, so we don't really know what monarch numbers were before land was converted to agriculture. But we do know that agricultural land used to provide pretty good habitat for monarchs because there were a lot of edges of the fields that monarchs and, well, first of all, there needed to be milkweed there because that's what monarch larvae need to eat. But there was a lot of land left over on the edges, and also there was milkweed growing within corn and soybean fields. But then all of that changed about 25 years ago, so there is no longer milkweed growing in row crop fields because farmers have much more effective ways to get rid of weeds in their fields due to genetically modified crops that can withstand herbicides. So our job is really to make up for that agricultural habitat that was lost.
And how do we go about doing that? That seems like a tall task.
Yeah, well, what I like to think about is what are the opportunities? So when you were walking home from work yesterday and you saw your neighbors with plants that would support monarchs in their yards, that's one thing we can do. Yard grass, lawns are possible habitat for monarchs if plants are added that support monarchs and other butterflies and pollinators. So we need milkweed and nectar plants. So that's one source of habitat, is basically anywhere there's a lawn. There are also rights-of-way habitats, like along roadsides or power lines or railroads, these long linear habitats that are possible for monarchs. Land that's already protected, so land that is either a park or a nature preserve, can often be improved to make more space for habitat. And then there's back to the agricultural land. There are a lot of possibilities between fields, on the edges of fields. So if farmers are irrigating their fields, there are corners that could be turned into monarch habitat. So what we really need to do is think of the possibilities, think what's out there that could be improved for monarchs.
So, and you mentioned milkweed and nectar plants as the ways that they feed, and I'd imagine milkweed is for the larvae, and then the nectar plants are for the butterfly itself?
That's right. Yeah, the monarch caterpillars or larvae, either word is fine to use, only will eat milkweed. They will eat any or almost any species of milkweed. In Wisconsin, we're lucky to have 12 great species of milkweed that monarchs can use. So the larvae are specialists, and then the adults will pretty much nectar from almost any flower.
Which is what I saw yesterday. It was in a flower garden, and somebody was feeding there, and I was glad to see it because I guess, and you've been studying it since the 80s. We don't see them like we used to, but although even if the population's been holding steady for the last couple of years.
Right. So it's been kind of interesting and sad to see the species you study decline so noticeably over the period that you're studying it. So, when I first started studying them, there were many, many more. And a lot of people notice that. A lot of people of a certain age say to me, well, there just aren't as many around as there were when I was a kid. So, yeah, they definitely have declined. But there are still enough of them that people see them and recognize them. They're a very recognizable butterfly. So they really do form this connection between people and the natural world. And I have not met very many people in my life that don't like monarchs.
Wait,
they're a pretty popular butterfly.
My question is, who are these people that don't like monarch butterflies? I don't believe they exist, Karen. I doubt that.
Well, I actually had an undergraduate student in my lab way back when, and he had a butterfly phobia. So people do exist. There aren't very many of them.
So, where is the monarch in its cycle right now? I know that they migrate south for the winter, but are we there yet? Are they getting ready? And if so, how do they prepare for the long trek they're about to take
Yeah.
off on?
So this is a really interesting time in Wisconsin for monarchs because the butterfly that you saw yesterday could have been getting ready to migrate, and it does that just by eating a lot while it's a caterpillar and then tanking up as an adult, getting ready for that long, long journey. But it also could be a non-migratory reproductive butterfly.
Oh.
So the monarchs that migrate to Mexico are physiologically different than the ones during the summer. So they aren't reproductive. They aren't developing eggs or sperm like the butterflies that are reproductive right away. So there's kind of a magic cutoff date in Wisconsin of about August 15th. And a butterfly that emerges before August 15th will be reproductive. It might move a little ways south, but it won't get all the way to Mexico. And a butterfly that emerges after August 15th will not be reproductive, and it will start that journey. So we are already seeing migration. I've already seen some butterflies definitely on a southward trajectory. And then I just found a monarch egg in my yard yesterday. So that we've got everything going on right now. So it's a really exciting time.
That is amazing. Not only do they go through that cocoon to go from a caterpillar to a butterfly, but the type of butterfly they become depends largely on the date or its environment or the climate. There is some magical indicator there that'll turn it from a reproductive butterfly into a migratory one?
Yep, and it's the sure cue, and that's the sun. So the butterfly it's observing both the angle of the sun in the sky, or not the butterfly, the caterpillar, and even the pupa are making these observations, and also day length. So everybody's probably noticing right now that day length is changing pretty quickly. You know, every day, right now we're losing about 3 minutes a day where the sunrise and sunset are cutting off so that the days are getting about 3 minutes shorter. And the butterflies and lots of other animals are cued into that. So they can respond appropriately, even though it's still plenty warm right now.
Mm-hmm.
They respond appropriately to what's going to happen, and that's based on the sun.
Isn't that like a nature's miracle? That is so mind-blowing. I mean, not the least of which going from a caterpillar to a butterfly, which still, if you stop to think about it, is nature's miracle, but then that they switch from, the type of butterfly they become based on the length of day that we have. Again, it just seems like this sort of evolutionary scale is almost difficult for my mind to comprehend, Karen.
Yeah, it is. And that's what's so wonderful about studying an organism for as long as I've studied monarchs is you really become sort of more and more awestruck by the amazingness of it all.
The more you know.
The more you know, the more you just kind of drop your jaw and say, how in the world can that happen?
Yeah. Yeah, and what a wonderful thing to be able to research. Karen Oberhauser is our guest, professor emerita at UW-Madison from the Department of Entomology. She started the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, a citizen science project with volunteers throughout North America. Also past president of the UW-Madison Arboretum, and you're invited to our conversation at 1-800-642-1234 or email talk@wpr.org. How long does a monarch butterfly live, Karen, generally speaking?
Well, the answer to that is it depends. If we think about these non-migratory butterflies, they are, and we start with when they're laid as an egg. They're an egg, then a larva, then a pupa, and the time between the egg being laid and the adult monarch emerging is about a month. So they're alive in those immature stages for a month. And then the non-migratory ones are alive as an adult for about another month, kind of 2 to 6 weeks. A really old monarch would be 6 weeks old. But the migratory ones that emerge in late August or later will live long enough to migrate for about 2 months. It takes them to get to Mexico. They'll arrive in Mexico in early November, stay there through mid-March, and then start the journey back. And those butterflies will live 8 to 10 months.
How's that even possible?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
It is amazing, and it really illustrates a couple things. It illustrates how expensive it is, how costly it is for animals to reproduce. So because monarch adults aren't putting all this energy, the males into chasing females and mating with the females and the females into producing eggs, they're saving a lot of energy. Second, they can store fat. So when they're a caterpillar and then once they become an adult and are drinking nectar, they're changing those nutrients into fat that they store right underneath their skin. And they basically live on that fat. And then the third thing that allows them to live so much longer is they're going kind of like to a refrigerator. So when they migrate, I know they're migrating to Mexico. They're getting out of Wisconsin, where it's going to be a freezer in the wintertime, but they're going somewhere where it's cool, and that just slows their metabolism way down. So it's like if I could take a 12-year-old kid and put him in a refrigerator for about 20 years and pull them out, and they'd still be like they were when I put them in. Now, we as humans can't do that, obviously, so don't try that with your kids.
Don't try this at home. But the migratory monarchs, they're the ones that store fat. They're the fatty monarchs that make the trek. They're the ones who live for a long time, and they do. And then, so do they reproduce when they get back up here?
Yeah, towards the end of the winter. So kind of starting in late February, mid-March, those butterflies, it's like their biological clock gets turned back on. They get pulled out of that refrigerator, and their biological clock kind of starts ticking. So they start aging more quickly, but they also become reproductive. So they'll actually start mating in the overwintering sites in Mexico. And then both males and females move north. Most of the females have mated at this point, and they're laying eggs along the way. But the males keep going with the females because the last male to mate with a female is the one whose sperm are used to fertilize her eggs. So the females will mate multiple times, and the males are going to have more offspring if they keep moving northward with the females. So I've heard people say the males stay in Mexico because they've already mated, but no, they come north with the females.
And they're seeding their eggs all the way up, which explains why you'd need a corridor for these butterflies in order for them to at least restore some of their population or maintain it at the very least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's really amazing is that their migration is so perfectly timed with milkweed. So I always know, well, it's not exactly true if we have a really early spring. So sometimes this gets a little messed up, but usually as soon as I start seeing milkweed emerge, and it's a little later than some of our other native plants, as soon as I start seeing milkweed emerge, I know that I'll see a monarch pretty soon.
That's just miraculous. Let's go to your questions now for our guest, Karen Oberhauser. We'll start with William in Door County. Hi, William.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
We're well. Hey, we raise monarchs, and we've released 100 or over 100 of them already. And when you mentioned, I forgot your name, I'm sorry, that there's a change when they become the group that's going to leave to go to Mexico, and you think it's based on the sun. What we've observed is that the butterflies would hatch or come out of their chrysalis in the morning, and then all of a sudden, all of them hatch in the late day. And and it's a complete 100% change. Is that somehow, is our curiosity correct, somehow related that that's the group that's going to start heading to Mexico because there's dramatic change in their emergence?
So, William, what you've observed about them emerging in the morning is usually the case. So they do that because, as I'm sure you've observed, when they first emerge from the chrysalis, their wings are very soft and they're not able to fly for several hours. So it's to the butterfly's advantage to emerge in the morning so that they have time to dry their wings before it gets dark, and they very rarely fly when it's dark. So that's why they emerge in the morning. And I have raised a lot of monarchs, and I have not observed that they start emerging later in the day during the end of the season. So the migratory generation, it's the date of emergence, not the time of the day. So yeah, probably I don't think that would be an indicator.
William, thank you for the call. Let's go to Keith and Ashland next. Hi, Keith.
Hi, mine's mostly an observation. A little over 20 years ago, I lived in northwest Iowa and had a big grove of trees out in the country. And I woke up one morning and it looked like all the leaves had died. And so when I went out to look, as the sun was coming up, all of a sudden, all these monarchs started opening their wings. And so it just changed the color of the trees to their orange and black. And then I watched them fly away. It's one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen.
I want to see that.
Oh, Keith, that you are a lucky person. That is an amazing, amazing thing to see. And I would imagine that you were seeing them probably late August or into September, and those were migratory monarchs. So we see whenever I talk about this, I get goosebumps on my head. So I have goosebumps right now, but the monarchs, as they're flying south, for some reason, often congregate together on trees. And like I just said to William, they don't fly at nighttime. So the monarchs that you saw on your tree had gathered there at the end of the day before and roosted together during the night, and they were getting ready to fly off. So just a quick message that I want to promote a great program called Journey North. Even though it's Journey North, it tracks monarchs during their southward migration too. It's really easy to find on the web, Journey North.
.org. I was looking at it before the show. I can't believe you brought it up. I was looking at the sightings.
So those you could report if you're a lucky person like Keith to see a roost, you can report it on Journey North, and that helps us track the monarchs. And you can also click onto the pictures. So when you get to the maps on the Journey North, you can find maps of migrating monarchs. And some of the dots on the map that show a roost have a little white square in them. And if you click on that little white square, you'll see pictures like what you described. So it's really great. So keep looking, Keith. Maybe you'll see it again.
And if you want, you can report at journeynorth.org. And part of this is the citizen science of it all, Karen, and part of that is the monarch larva monitoring project. With about a minute left here, what can we do on behalf of our monarchs besides the milkweed and the nectar plants that we can help with them for food?
Yeah, so that's the big thing, is create habitat. And then the second thing that we can do is contribute to monarch citizen science. So report the monarchs you see to Journey North. You can check out the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, another citizen science project. You can support conservation organizations that are doing the things that we need for habitat. And finally, now you've listened to me for 20 minutes. You are a monarch expert, so you can tell your friends and neighbors and get them to help.
Well, just share some of the stories and some of the unbelievable science of it all, because if you didn't know it from somebody who's been researching it from the 80s, I'd be hard-pressed to believe it.
It is kind of unbelievable. You're right.
Karen, I want to thank you for sharing your work with us. I want to invite you back, and especially thank you for sharing your love of these beautiful butterflies with us as they get ready to make their amazing trek down to Mexico and back. Let's reconvene next spring when the milkweed blooms and the monarchs return.
That would be a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, and thanks for sharing your stories.
I had a bunch of them. I don't know why. I get excited about the monarch butterfly. And how could you not? I guess unless you had, the phobia of butterflies. In that case, it's understandable. By the way, we put a link up to the Journey North website on our little section of the webpage, wpr.org/Lee. Karen Oberhauser, Professor Emerita at the UW-Madison Department of Entomology. Her research to the monarchs go back to the 1980s. She started the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project and is a former director of the UW-Madison Arboretum. Thanks to our team today. I'm Lee Rayburn, and thanks to you for being a part of the show as well. I'm Lee Rayburn, and you are listening to WPR News.